The island of Tsukimori had always been a place where mist arrived before dawn, rolling in from the sea like a living thing. It would settle into the valleys between the hills, pool around the bases of the old cedar trees, and thread itself through the stone bridges that connected one part of the island to another. Kenji loved these mornings best, when he could pretend the world was made only of gray and silver, and the sound of his footsteps on moss-covered stone was the only proof he existed at all. He was 9 years old, small for his age, with perpetually scraped knees and hands that were always dirty from climbing trees or catching beetles in the forest. His hair stuck up at odd angles no matter how his mother tried to tame it, and his school uniform always had at least one button undone by the time he reached the classroom. But none of this mattered to Kenji. What mattered were the bridges. There were 47 bridges on Tsukimori, though most people only counted the 12 large ones that spanned the wider streams. Kenji had counted them all. He knew the broad stone arch near the shrine, where teenagers went to make wishes and tie paper fortunes to the railings. He knew the tiny stepping stones across the creek behind the Tanaka farm, each one barely wider than his foot, placed there so long ago that they'd sunk into the stream bed and grown slippery with algae. He knew the covered bridge near his house, with its wooden roof that leaked when it rained hard, creating a curtain of water you had to dash through to reach the other side. His father was building a new bridge. Not a stone bridge or a wooden one, but something made of steel and concrete that would stretch across the strait between Tsukimori and the mainland. 2 kilometers of engineered certainty suspended over the churning water. It would be tall enough for ships to pass beneath and wide enough for 4 lanes of traffic. It would bring tourists and money and opportunities, his father said. It would save the island. Kenji didn't think the island needed saving, but he'd learned not to say this out loud. The construction site dominated the eastern shore, where the fishing village had once been. The fishermen had been relocated to new houses near the harbor, houses with vinyl siding and indoor heating that didn't smell like smoke. The old village, with its weathered wooden buildings and narrow paths between houses where neighbors could pass, baskets of vegetables through windows, had been demolished to make room for the bridge's foundation. Now there were tractors and cement mixers, portable offices and safety fences, men in hard hats shouting instructions over the noise of machinery. Kenji's father was the lead engineer. He left before sunrise and came home after dark, his clothes dusty with concrete powder, his face tired but determined. At dinner, he would talk about load calculations and stress tests, about the mayor's latest visit, and the newspaper articles praising his vision. Kenji's mother would smile and refill his tea, and Kenji would push his rice around his bowl and think about the covered bridge near their house, wondering how much longer it would remain standing once the big bridge was complete and no one needed the old paths anymore. It was on one of those misty mornings, 3 weeks into summer vacation, that Kenji met the fox. He'd gone out early to explore the northern forest, where the oldest bridges were. These were the ones tourists never saw, hidden among the trees where the trails petered out into deer paths and memories. Some were so ancient their stones had cracked and shifted, creating gaps you had to jump over. Others were so overgrown with ferns and moss that they looked like natural formations, as if the earth itself had decided to reach across the water. Kenji was examining one such bridge, a small arch over a stream no wider than his arm span, when he noticed the fox sitting on the opposite bank. It was red, or seemed to be in the diffused morning light, with a tail that was too fluffy and too long to be quite real. Its eyes were amber, the color of honey held up to sunlight. And they watched him with an intelligence that made him feel suddenly exposed, as if he'd wandered into someone's private room without knocking. "Sorry," Kenji said automatically, though he wasn't sure what he was apologizing for. The fox tilted its head. The movement was bird-like, curious rather than threatening. Then, to Kenji's shock, it spoke. "You're the bridge builder's son." Its voice was light, neither masculine nor feminine, carrying the slight rasp of wind through dry grass. Kenji's first instinct was to run. His second instinct, the one that won, was to freeze completely. His grandmother had told him stories about fox spirits, kitsune, that could transform into beautiful women or mischievous priests, that guarded shrines and granted wishes and sometimes led travelers astray just for entertainment. He'd always thought they were just stories. Yes, he managed. "My father is building the bridge." "The big one." "I know," the fox said. It stood and stretched, arching its back like a cat, each movement deliberate and unhurried. "We all know. That's why I've been looking for you." "For me?" Kenji's voice came out higher than he intended. The fox stepped onto the bridge. Its paws made no sound on the stone. As it crossed, Kenji noticed other things that weren't quite right. The way its shadow fell at an angle that didn't match the sun, the faint shimmer around its edges like heat rising from summer pavement, the fact that the moss beneath its feet didn't bend or compress. "This bridge," the fox said, stopping in the center of the arch, "is 273 years old. It was built by a stonemason named Hideaki, who was in love with a farmer's daughter who lived on the other side of this stream. He built it in secret, one stone at a time, over the course of a summer. When it was finished, he crossed it to propose. She said yes." Kenji blinked. That's nice." "It is nice," the fox agreed. "But that's not why I told you. I told you because this bridge, like all the bridges on this island, is part of a path that's been here longer than your village, longer than your grandparents' grandparents. We use these bridges to travel across the island without touching the water, which is difficult for us, we?" Kenji asked. The fox's tail swished once, twice. Behind it, the mist seemed to thicken and take shape. Kenji saw them then. Other spirits, barely visible, like watercolor paintings left in the rain. A deer with antlers that branched into tree limbs, a crane whose wings trailed streaks of cloud, something small and round that might have been a tanuki, or might have been a boulder with eyes. They flickered at the edges of his vision, there and not there, watching. "The spirits of Tsukimori," the fox said simply. "We've lived here since before humans built their first shelter. We've watched your people plant rice in the paddies, build shrines to honor us, string lanterns during festivals. We've been mostly content with this arrangement. Your kind stays in your places, we stay in ours, and the bridges let us move between." Kenji's throat felt dry. "And the new bridge?" The fox's ears flattened slightly. "Your father's bridge doesn't just cross water. It crosses ley lines, the invisible paths we travel. Where it stands, it will sever 3 of them. Maybe 4. We won't be able to reach the northern forests or the shrine on the hill. The seasonal paths will be broken." "I don't understand," Kenji said, though part of him did, in the way you understand things in dreams before waking chases the meaning away. "Imagine," the fox said, stepping off the bridge to stand beside him, "that someone built a wall through your house. You could still live in half of it, but you couldn't reach your bedroom or the kitchen. You'd have to go outside, walk around the entire building to get to the other rooms. Except for us, there is no going around. The paths are specific. When they're cut, they're gone. Kenji thought of his father's blueprints spread across the dining table, covered in numbers and measurements. He thought of the pride in his father's voice when he described how the bridge would stand for 100 years, how it would connect the island to the world. He'd never mentioned spirits or paths. Kenji wasn't sure his father even believed in such things. "What do you want me to do?" Kenji asked quietly. The fox regarded him with those honey-colored eyes. "I'm not sure yet, but you're young enough to still see us clearly, and you love the bridges. I thought, perhaps you might help us find a solution, before it's too late." "When will it be too late?" 3 months, the fox said. "That's when the main span will be completed. After that, the damage is permanent. 3 months. The rest of summer and into autumn." Kenji felt the weight of it settle onto his shoulders like a too heavy school bag. "My name is Kenji," he said, because it seemed important to introduce himself properly to someone asking for help. "I know," the fox said, but there was something gentler in its voice now. "You can call me Yuki." "That means snow," Kenji said, surprised. "I was born during the first snowfall, 247 years ago," Yuki said. "I was the runt of my litter. Too small, too weak. I would have died if the stonemason Hideaki hadn't found me and left food by this bridge every night for a month." She paused. "That's why I guard this particular bridge. It's where I learned that humans could be kind." The other spirits had faded now, melted back into the mist. It was just Kenji and Yuki on the stream bank, with the ancient stone arch between them and the sound of water moving over rocks below. "I should go home," Kenji said. "My mother will worry. Will you come back?" Kenji looked at the bridge, at the way the moss had crept over its stones like a soft blanket, at how the morning light turned the water underneath into flowing gold. He thought about the big bridge his father was building, all steel and concrete and ambition. He thought about walls through houses and paths that couldn't be walked around. "Yes," he said, "I'll come back." Kenji did come back the next morning and the morning after that. Each time, Yuki was waiting by the bridge, sometimes alone, sometimes with other spirits visible in the periphery. She began to teach him things: how to see the paths the spirits used, how to recognize which bridges were merely physical structures and which ones served as true thresholds between worlds. "Look here," Yuki said one morning, pointing with her nose to the base of the stone arch. "Do you see the carving?" Kenji knelt, pushing aside the ferns. There, almost invisible under decades of moss, was a small symbol etched into the stone, a spiral inside a circle. "It's a marker," Yuki explained. "The old bridge builders knew about us. Not all of them, but some. The ones who listened to the land before they built. They left these signs to show which bridges were part of the spirit paths." Over the following weeks, Kenji found the symbols on 11 of the island's bridges. Always hidden, always subtle, a spiral, a crescent, sometimes just 3 small dots arranged in a triangle. The big modern bridges had none of these marks. They'd been built for efficiency, for carrying weight, for lasting against typhoons, but they hadn't been built with the spirits in mind. His father noticed his absence at breakfast. "You're up early these days," he said one morning, looking up from the engineering report spread across the table. "What have you been doing?" "Exploring," Kenji said, which was true. "Looking at the old bridges," his father's expression softened. "You've always loved those, haven't you? I remember when you were 5. You made me walk you to every bridge on the island. You had a little notebook where you tried to draw them all. Kenji remembered too. He'd filled 3 notebooks with crayon sketches, each bridge a different color, each one labeled with the name he'd invented for it. The Rainbow Bridge, the Bridge of Frogs, the bridge where time goes slowly. Dad, Kenji said carefully, why did people build so many bridges here? I mean, some of the streams are really small. You could almost step across them. His father considered this, setting down his tea. Old Tsukimori was different. Before roads, before cars, people walked everywhere. A small stream might not seem like much, but if you're carrying rice harvest, or if there's been rain and the water's high, you need a safe way across. The bridges connected the community. They were infrastructure, but also gathering places, social anchors. And the new bridge? Kenji asked. What will it be? Progress, his father said firmly. A future for this island. Young people leave, Kenji. Your cousin Hiro left. The Suzuki twins left. They go to the mainland for university and never come back because there are no opportunities here. No jobs, no future. The bridge will change that. Kenji wanted to ask, but what if the future costs too much? What if there are things worth keeping that can't be measured in jobs and opportunities? Instead, he said, can I come see the construction site? His father's face lit up. Really, you want to? Kenji nodded, feeling guilty for the hope in his father's eyes. But he needed to understand the bridge, both bridges, the physical one and the damage it would cause to the invisible paths. That afternoon, wearing a hard hat that was too big for him, Kenji stood at the edge of the construction site. The scale of it took his breath away. The foundation pillars rose from the water like giants' legs, concrete and steel disappearing into the depth below. Cranes swung enormous beams through the air. Workers shouted coordinates. The noise was incredible. Metal on metal, engines roaring, the percussion of construction. This is Tower 2, his father explained, shouting over the din. We've just started on the main cable assembly. See those strands? Each one can hold tremendous weight. When they're all woven together and anchored on both sides, they'll support the entire roadway. Kenji looked at where his father was pointing, but what he saw made his stomach drop. There, cutting through the air exactly where the main cable would be strung, was a shimmer, like heat haze, but vertical. It was a spirit path, one of the ley lines Yuki had described. He could see it now, the way he'd learned to see by standing still and looking with soft eyes rather than hard focus. The path glowed faintly, a thread of golden green light that connected the mainland to a point somewhere in the island's interior. When the cable was strung, it would cut right through that light. Are you okay? His father asked. You look pale. I'm fine, Kenji lied. It's just really big. His father laughed and ruffled his hair. It is big. It's the biggest thing I've ever built. The biggest thing anyone's built on Tsukimori in a century. That night, Kenji couldn't sleep. He lay in bed listening to the sounds of the island, the distant whisper of waves, the creak of the old house settling, his parents' low voices in the next room discussing schedules and budgets. Through his window, he could see the covered bridge near their house, its wooden silhouette dark against the star-scattered sky. He thought about Yuki's question. What do you want me to do? The truth was, he didn't know. He was 9 years old. He couldn't stop the bridge construction. He couldn't tell his father about spirits and invisible paths. His father would think he'd been reading too many of grandmother's old stories. He couldn't choose between his father's dream and his promise to Yuki. But maybe, Kenji thought, He didn't have to choose. Maybe there was another way. The next morning, he brought a notebook and pencil to meet Yuki. Not the childish crayon drawings of his past, but careful observations, measurements, questions. "Can you show me exactly where the paths run?" he asked. "All of them. Everyone that crosses where the bridge will be." Yuki's ears perked forward. "You have an idea?" "Maybe," Kenji said. "I don't know if it will work, but my father says bridges are about connecting things. What if we could build the new bridge in a way that doesn't break the old connections?" For 3 weeks, Kenji mapped the spirit paths. It was slow, painstaking work. Yuki would lead him to a location and ask him to sit very still, to breathe slowly, to let his eyes unfocus until he could see the shimmer of the ley lines. Then Kenji would mark the spot in his notebook, measure distances from landmarks, sketch rough diagrams. The paths weren't straight. They curved and looped, following the natural contours of the island, the ridgeline of hills, the flow of streams, the root systems of ancient trees. Where they intersected with the old bridges, they seemed to brighten, as if the bridges themselves were nodes in a network, places where energy could rest or redirect. 4 major paths ran through the area where his father's bridge would stand. The first connected the shrine on the northern hill to a grove of cedar trees near the southern shore. The second linked the old lighthouse to a natural spring in the forest. The third and fourth were more complex, weaving between smaller locations, a particular rock formation, a centuries-old camphor tree, the ruins of a temple that had burned down before Kenji's grandparents were born. "These places," Kenji asked, "what makes them special?" "They're thin places," Yuki said, "where the boundary between your world and ours is like paper instead of a wall. We can move more easily there. We can be more ourselves." Kenji thought he understood. It was like how he felt on the covered bridge near his house during rain. More present, more real, as if the sound of water on wood somehow made him more himself. He began researching in the island's small library, an old building that smelled of mildew and paper. The librarian, Mrs. Koizumi, was surprised to see him. "History section," she said, adjusting her glasses. "That's unusual for summer vacation." "I'm interested in the bridges," Kenji explained. "Ah." Mrs. Koizumi's expression warmed. "Your father's project. It's very exciting." "No, I mean, yes, but I want to learn about the old bridges, how they were built, why they were built where they were." Mrs. Koizumi led him to a corner shelf where dusty volumes documented the island's history. Most were boring: census records, fishing yields, administrative reports. But one book, its cover water-stained and spine-cracked, caught his attention. Traditional Construction Methods of Tsukimori Island by someone named Takeshi Yamamoto, published in 1967. The book was dense, full of technical terms Kenji didn't understand, but scattered throughout were passages that made his heart race. The old masters insisted on choosing bridge sites through a practice they called listening to the land. This involved observation of natural features, attention to seasonal changes, and, according to some accounts, consultation with local spiritual beliefs. While modern engineering rightfully prioritizes structural concerns, these traditional methods often resulted in placements that have proven remarkably durable and resistant to erosion. Another passage. The stonemason Hideaki, 1732-1801, was known for leaving small carved markers on his bridges. The meaning of these symbols has been lost. though local folklore suggests they were protective charms or dedications to kami spirits. Kenji photocopied pages with his allowance money, his hands trembling slightly. The old builders had known, maybe not all of them, maybe not consciously, but they'd known to pay attention to more than just engineering. They'd built bridges that served two purposes: crossing water and preserving something invisible. Could a modern bridge do the same? That evening, Kenji spread his notebooks and photocopies across his bedroom floor. He sketched and calculated, erased and redrew. His idea was taking shape, but it required understanding something he'd never thought about before: how his father actually designed bridges. He found his father in the home office, bent over blueprints, glasses sliding down his nose. "Dad," Kenji said, "can you explain how you decide where to put the support pillars?" His father looked up, surprised but pleased. "It's complex. We have to consider water depth, soil composition, current strength, load distribution." "Why?" "I'm just curious. Like, could you move them? If you needed to? Move them?" His father frowned. "We've already poured the foundations. Moving them now would cost millions and delay the project by months. Why would we move them? I mean, theoretically," Kenji said quickly. "If you were designing it from scratch, could the pillars go in different places and the bridge still work?" His father leaned back in his chair. "Within certain parameters, yes. There's never just one solution to an engineering problem. There are many possible designs, and we choose based on cost, efficiency, environmental impact, aesthetics. We did survey alternative configurations before settling on this one." "Do you still have those alternative designs?" "Somewhere in the office files at the construction site." His father studied Kenji's face. "What's this about?" Kenji hesitated. He'd been practicing what to say, how to explain without mentioning spirits or invisible paths. "I've been thinking about the old bridges, how they were placed, and I wondered if the new bridge could honor that somehow. Like, maybe the support pillars could avoid certain spots that are historically significant." His father's expression softened but also became sad. "Kenji, I know you love the old ways, I do too. But we can't let sentiment interfere with progress. The bridge placement is optimal for safety and function. That has to come first." "But what if it didn't have to be a choice?" Kenji pressed. "What if you could have both?" His father sighed. "Show me what you're thinking." Kenji ran to his room and returned with his notebooks. He'd been careful not to mention spirits in his notes. Instead, he'd marked the ley lines as traditional significant pathways and noted where they intersected with the bridge construction zone. He'd marked the old carved symbols as historical markers of cultural importance. "These paths," he said, pointing to his drawings, "connect important places on the island. The shrine, the old temple ruins, the lighthouse. The paths cross right here, here, and here, exactly where the bridge will be." His father studied the drawings, his engineering mind automatically analyzing. "These are interesting. Where did you get this information?" "Old library books. And I walked the island, measuring things." "You did all this yourself?" His father looked impressed. "This is good work, Kenji, really good. But I don't see how it changes the bridge design." "What if the support pillars were positioned to avoid these crossing points?" Kenji said. "Or what if there were gaps in the roadway? Not holes, but like spaces underneath where the paths could pass through. Like the bridge could arch higher in certain spots?" His father was quiet for a long moment. "That's not a bad thought," he said slowly. variable arch heights. It would be more expensive, more complicated, but it's not impossible. He looked at Kenji. Why does this matter so much to you? Kenji chose his words carefully. Grandma always said that when we build something new, we should remember what was there before. Not to stop progress, but to carry the old things forward with us, so we don't lose who we are. His father's eyes were bright. He reached out and pulled Kenji into a hug. When did you get so wise? I'm not wise, Kenji mumbled into his father's shirt. I'm just paying attention. The next week, something unexpected happened. Kenji's father brought home the alternative bridge designs from the office and spread them across the dining table. He'd been thinking about Kenji's suggestion, he said, not because he believed in spiritual paths. He said this gently, not dismissively, but because the idea of designing a bridge that respected the island's historical geography appealed to him. Look at this, his father said, pointing to one of the blueprints. This was our second choice design. It has a longer main span with fewer support pillars. More expensive, but it would avoid this area here, where your historical path crosses. Kenji leaned over the drawing, his heart racing. The design showed a graceful arch that would soar higher over the water, with support pillars positioned exactly where the ley lines wouldn't be severed. It wasn't perfect. One path would still be disrupted, but it was so much better than the current plan. Could you really change to this design? Kenji asked. It would require convincing the mayor and the construction company, his father said. We'd need to justify the additional cost. But if I could frame it as preserving cultural heritage while achieving the same structural goals... He trailed off, thinking. We'd need more than your notebooks, though. We'd need proof that these paths are historically significant. Documentation. Artifacts. Something concrete. Kenji's stomach sank. The paths were invisible. The only proof was the carved symbols on the old bridges, and even those were ambiguous. I'll find proof, Kenji said with more confidence than he felt. That night, he returned to the covered bridge near his house. Yuki was waiting, as he'd somehow known she would be. My father might change the design, Kenji said excitedly, but he needs proof that the paths are real. Not spirit real, human real. Historical records or artifacts or something. Yuki's tail swished thoughtfully. The old stonemasons left more than symbols. They left journals, some of them, records of their work. One, Hideaki's apprentice, a man named Kenta, was particularly detailed. He wrote about the listening to the land practice, about how they chose sites. Where would those journals be? The shrine, Yuki said. There's a storage room beneath the main building. The priests kept records there. Births, deaths, construction projects, offerings. If Kenta's journal survived, that's where it would be. The shrine was on the northern hill, a 20-minute walk through the forest. Kenji had been there for festivals, but never explored beyond the main courtyard. The idea of asking the priest to search through old storage rooms seemed daunting. I'll try, he said. The next morning, Kenji climbed the stone steps to the shrine. The priest, an elderly man named Sato, was sweeping leaves from the courtyard. He looked up as Kenji approached, his weathered face creasing into a smile. Young Takahashi, he said, your father is building our bridge to the future. Yes, Kenji said. That's actually why I'm here. I'm researching the old bridges for a school project. The lie came easier than he expected. I heard there might be historical records stored here. Journals from old builders? Priest Sato leaned on his broom. That old storage room. I haven't been down there in years. It's mostly boxes and mice, I'm afraid. But you're welcome to look, if you're not afraid of dust and spiders. The storage room was exactly as described. Dusty, dim, smelling of old paper and mildew. Kenji used the flashlight the priest had given him to navigate between stacks of boxes and wooden crates. Some contained offering bowls and ceremonial items. Others held ledgers with faded ink, recording donations and prayers from decades past. He was about to give up when he found a small chest tucked in the corner, half hidden behind a broken shrine gate. The chest was simple wood, darkened with age, with a metal clasp that opened with surprising ease. Inside were books, not many, maybe 7 or 8, but bound carefully in leather and cloth. Kenji opened the first one. The handwriting was old-fashioned, barely readable, but he could make out dates. 1794, 1795, someone's daily records of weather and work. The third book made him stop breathing. The frontispiece read, Records of Bridge Construction and Maintenance, by Kenta Matsumoto, apprentice to Master Hideaki, begun in the year of the sheep, 1799. Kenji's hands shook as he turned the pages. The entries were meticulous. Master Hideaki insists we observe the site for 3 days before placing a single stone. We must watch how water moves, how light falls, how birds behave. He says bridges must honor what is already there, not impose upon it. And later, today we marked the foundation stones with the spiral circle, as is tradition. Master says this symbol tells the spirits we mean no harm, that we build to connect, not to divide. I confess I do not fully understand these old beliefs, but I honor them for his sake. More entries detailed specific bridges, their construction, the reasoning behind their placement. One passage made Kenji's breath catch. The bridge near the cedar grove was the most difficult. The path of the autumn spirits runs through that spot. I could feel it, though I cannot explain how. We adjusted the arch 3 times until Master was satisfied that we had created a passage rather than a barrier. A bridge, he told me, should allow all travelers to cross, not just those we can see. Kenji carefully carried the journal to Priest Sato. This, he said. This is important. Can I borrow it? Or copy pages? The priest examined the journal, his eyes widening. I'd forgotten this was here. This is a piece of our island's heritage. He looked at Kenji. Why does a school project need such specific records? Kenji told him the truth, or most of it. About his father's bridge. About the old paths and traditions. About trying to find a way to honor both progress and preservation. He didn't mention spirits, but Priest Sato's eyes grew thoughtful. Your grandmother used to bring you here when you were small, the priest said. She would tell you stories about the island. Do you remember? Kenji did remember. Stories about foxes and tanuki, about the spirits that lived in trees and streams, about the old ways of living with the land instead of upon it. I remember, he said quietly. Take the journal, Priest Sato said. Show your father. Some things are worth preserving, even if we can't measure their value in yen. Kenji's father stayed up late that night, reading Kenta's journal by lamplight. Kenji watched from the hallway, afraid to interrupt. His mother joined him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. Your father is thinking, she said softly. This is good. In the morning, his father called a meeting with the construction company and the mayor. Kenji wasn't allowed to attend, but he waited anxiously at home, unable to focus on anything. His mother made them tea and let him pace. When his father returned that evening, his face was unreadable. Kenji's heart sank. Then his father smiled, tired but genuine. "We're redesigning the bridge," he said. "It's going to cost more and take an extra month, but we're using the alternative design. The one that preserves the historical pathways." Kenji felt relief wash over him so intensely he had to sit down. His mother hugged his father, and then they were both hugging Kenji, and he felt like he might cry but wasn't sure why. "The mayor was actually excited," his father continued. "He thinks we can market it as an eco-heritage bridge, modern engineering that respects cultural history." The construction company wasn't happy about the changes, but they agreed when we showed them the journal. Turns out having a historical foundation for our design decisions makes good press. That night, Kenji ran to the covered bridge. Yuki was there, along with other spirits, more visible now, more solid. The deer with tree branch antlers, the crane, a badger that might have been a tanuki, others he couldn't name. "It worked," he said breathlessly. "They're changing the design. The paths will be preserved. Most of them, at least." Yuki's ears perked up. "Most?" "There's still one path that will be disrupted," Kenji admitted. "The one near Tower 2. My father said there's no way around it without compromising the bridge's structural integrity. But the others will be okay. The bridge will arch over them." The spirits were quiet. Kenji felt the weight of their attention, their assessment of whether this compromise was enough. "Which path?" Yuki asked finally. "The one connecting the old temple ruins to the lighthouse," Kenji said. "It's the smallest of the 4 major paths. My father said..." He stopped, unsure how to explain structural engineering to a fox spirit. Yuki turned to the other spirits. A conversation happened in silence, or perhaps in a language Kenji couldn't hear. The deer's antlers rustled like wind through leaves. The crane's wings shimmered. The tanuki badger nodded slowly. "The temple path," Yuki said at last, "is the least used. The temple has been ruins for nearly a century. Many of us have found other ways to reach the lighthouse." She paused. 3 paths saved is better than none. You've done well, bridge builder's son." But there was something sad in her voice, something resigned. Kenji felt it in his chest, the understanding that even good compromises meant loss. "I'm sorry," he said. "I wish I could save all of them." "In this world," Yuki said gently, "nothing stays unchanged forever. Not temples, not paths, not even spirits. What matters is that you tried to build something that serves more than one purpose. That's wisdom your father's bridge will carry, even if he doesn't know it." The construction timeline shifted. New calculations were made, new materials ordered. Kenji watched from the shore as workers adjusted their plans, moving equipment, remarking boundaries. The change was subtle. To most observers, it would look like any other bridge. But Kenji could see the difference. The main arch soared higher now, creating spaces where the ley lines could pass underneath, unbroken. The support pillars stood like sentries, but positioned to guard rather than obstruct. His father worked longer hours, but there was something different in his tiredness now. A satisfaction that hadn't been there before. At dinner, he would explain the new challenges, the elegant solutions they'd found. "The increased arch height actually improves the aesthetic," he said one evening, spooning rice into his bowl. "It's going to be beautiful. And structurally, it's just as sound as the original design. Better even in some ways." The longer span distributes weight more evenly. Kenji's mother smiled, refilling his tea. I always said our bridge should be beautiful. People forget that function and beauty aren't opposites. They're not, his father agreed, and there was wonder in his voice, as if he'd discovered something he'd known all along but forgotten. Kenta's journal, reading about how the old builders worked, it reminded me why I became an engineer in the first place. Not just to build things that stand, but to build things that belong. As summer faded into autumn, Kenji continued visiting Yuki and the spirits. They showed him other things now, how to see the shimmer of dawn spirits in the early morning mist, how to recognize which trees housed minor kami, how to walk quietly enough that the deer spirits wouldn't startle. The island became layered for him, every location holding both its physical reality and its invisible significance. He learned that the covered bridge near his house was a favorite resting spot for traveling spirits, that the sound of rain on its wooden roof was actually a kind of song that called to them. He learned that the stepping stones behind the Tanaka farm had been placed by a farmer who could see spirits, a woman who'd wanted to make sure the small water kami could cross safely during floods. He learned that every bridge had a story, and most of those stories involved someone paying attention to more than what their eyes could see. School started again. Kenji's teacher assigned an essay about their summer, and he wrote about bridges, old and new, visible and invisible. He didn't mention spirits explicitly, but he wrote about how the old builders had listened to the land, and how his father was trying to do the same with modern tools. He wrote about compromise and preservation, about how progress didn't have to mean forgetting. His teacher gave him the highest grade in class and asked him to read it aloud. Kenji's classmates listened politely, though some looked confused. Only May, a girl who lived near the shrine, met his eyes with understanding. My grandfather talks about things like that, she said after class, about how places have memory. Yeah, Kenji said, relieved to find someone who might understand. Exactly like that. October brought the typhoon season. The construction paused as storms rolled through, testing the partially completed bridge against wind and rain. Kenji watched from his window as the structure stood firm, water streaming off its concrete surfaces, the steel cables humming in the wind like the strings of some enormous instrument. The sound was haunting and beautiful, a deep resonance that seemed to echo from the earth itself. Yuki appeared on the covered bridge one rainy afternoon, her fur somehow dry despite the downpour. Kenji had run there instinctively, knowing she would be waiting. "The new bridge sings," she said, her amber eyes reflecting the gray sky. "Do you hear it?" Kenji listened. Through the sound of rain drumming on the wooden roof above them, he could hear it, a deep, resonant tone, almost below hearing. The bridge responding to the storm, finding its voice. "The old bridges sing too," Yuki continued. "Each one has its own note. They form a kind of song across the island. Your father's bridge will add a new voice to that song, a deeper one. Is that good?" Kenji asked, watching the rain create patterns on the stream below. "It's different," Yuki said. "Not good or bad, just different. Change always brings a new song." She paused, tilting her head in that bird-like way. "The spirits have been talking about what comes after the bridge is finished. After the bridge brings what it will bring. More people, more cars, more change." Yuki's tail swished slowly. "Some spirits will leave. They prefer the old quiet. But others are curious. They want to see what happens when the island opens its arms to the wider world. Kenji felt a pang of sadness. Will you leave? No, Yuki said, and there was certainty in her voice. I guard the bridges. All of them now, I think. The old ones and the new one. Someone needs to remember why they're all important. By November, the main span was complete. There was a ceremony. The mayor gave a speech about progress and prosperity. Kenji's father cut a ribbon while cameras flashed. Politicians from the mainland shook hands and smiled for photographers. Kenji stood with his mother at the edge of the crowd, watching his father smile and bow and accept congratulations. But what Kenji saw, beyond the celebration, was the bridge itself, arching across the strait with a grace that seemed almost organic, as if it had grown there rather than been built. Its form was elegant and purposeful, creating passages for travelers both visible and invisible. The ley lines flowed through the spaces his father had designed, unbroken and bright in Kenji's sight, like threads of golden green light weaving under and through the steel and concrete. In the late afternoon, when the ceremony had ended and most people had gone home, Kenji's father found him standing at the base of the bridge, looking up at its underside where the main arch soared overhead. What do you think? His father asked quietly. Kenji searched for the right words. It's beautiful, but it's also right, like it was always supposed to be here. His father put his hand on Kenji's shoulder. You know, the engineers from the mainland kept asking why we made certain design choices. Why the variable arch heights? Why the specific pillar placements? I showed them the calculations, the structural justifications. But the real reason, he paused, the real reason is that sometimes you have to trust that there are things you can't measure but still matter. You taught me that. I didn't teach you anything, Kenji said. I just showed you Kenta's journal. You showed me how to pay attention, his father corrected. That's not nothing. That night, the spirits held their own ceremony. Kenji found them gathered at the shore, beneath the new bridge, dozens of them more visible now than he'd ever seen before. They stood in a loose circle, looking up at the structure that towered above them. And Kenji realized they were saying goodbye. Not to their paths, which had been preserved, but to the island as it had been. Nothing would be the same after this. The bridge would bring changes the spirits couldn't control, couldn't predict. Cars would cross from the mainland. Tourists would come to see the island's winter landscapes and summer festivals. Businesses would expand. Young people might return with mainland educations and new ideas. The quiet, isolated island of Tsukimori would become something else. Are you afraid? Kenji asked Yuki, standing beside her as they looked up at the bridge's underbelly where the spirit paths wove through. Yes, she said simply. Change is always frightening. Even good change, even necessary change. She paused, her amber eyes reflecting the bridge lights that had just flickered on in the dusk. But your father built something that remembers us, even if he doesn't know it. That gives me hope. The deer spirit stepped forward, its antlers catching the last light of sunset, and touched its nose to the nearest bridge pillar. One by one, the other spirits did the same. The crane, the tanuki, creatures Kenji had no names for. It was a blessing, he realized, or maybe a promise, an acknowledgement that this bridge, like the old ones, could be a connection rather than a division. Yuki was the last to approach the pillar. She placed her paw against the concrete, and for a moment, Kenji saw something. A shimmer, a glow. A mark that wasn't quite there, but wasn't quite not there either. When she stepped back, he could have sworn he saw the faintest outline of a spiral inside a circle etched into the concrete, invisible to anyone who didn't know to look for it. So both kinds of travelers know they're welcome, Yuki said. The bridge opened to traffic in December, just as the first snow began to fall. Kenji stood on the covered bridge near his house and watched the cars cross from the mainland, a slow stream at first, then more and more as word spread. His cousin Hiro came back for New Year's, driving across in a car that still had mainland plates, marveling at how strange it felt to reach the island without taking the ferry. "It doesn't feel like coming home anymore," Hiro said at dinner, but he was smiling. "It feels like the island came to meet me halfway." Kenji's grandmother, who rarely spoke at family gatherings anymore, looked up from her tea. "The island hasn't moved," she said, "but maybe it's learning to dance." In January, when school resumed after winter break, Kenji walked a different route, across the new bridge rather than taking his usual path through the forest. It felt strange at first, walking on the wide pedestrian lane while cars hummed past on the roadway. But as he reached the midpoint and looked down at the water far below, he felt it. The bridge was singing. Its voice was different from the old bridges, deeper, as Yuki had said, more complex. The sound of steel cables and wind, of traffic vibrations creating harmonics, of water and stone and metal all resonating together. It wasn't better or worse than the old songs, just new. Another voice in the island's chorus. He looked up and saw them, spirits crossing above him, walking the ley lines that passed through the spaces his father had left open in the design. They moved like light through glass, barely visible in the bright winter morning, but there, still traveling their ancient paths, but now under a bridge built by human hands that had learned to listen. May from school was crossing the bridge from the opposite direction. She stopped beside him, following his gaze upward. "Do you see them?" she asked quietly. Kenji looked at her in surprise. "You can see them?" "Sometimes," she said. "My grandfather says I have the sight. He told me what you did. Priest Sato told him about the journal, about how you convinced your father to change the design. He says you're a bridge builder too, in your own way." They stood together for a moment, watching spirits and cars cross the same space, each unaware of the other, but coexisting nonetheless. Two worlds, connected by the same structure. "I just paid attention," Kenji said. "That's how bridges start," May replied, "by paying attention to both sides." Spring came to Tsukimori with cherry blossoms and tourists, with mainland school groups taking field trips across the new bridge, with photographers trying to capture the perfect shot of the structure against the sunrise. The island was busier now, louder, more connected to the rhythms of the outside world, but the old bridges remained. People still used them. Islanders who preferred the quiet paths through the forest, children playing by the streams, teenagers going to the shrine to make wishes and tie paper fortunes to the railings. The covered bridge near Kenji's house still leaked when it rained hard, still created that curtain of water you had to dash through. Kenji still visited Yuki most mornings before school. She was teaching him the names of things, not the human names, but the spirit names. The true names of stones and streams and trees. The words that described how things really were, rather than how they appeared to be. "You're getting older," Yuki said one morning. She was stretched out on the old stone arch, her tail hanging over the edge, completely relaxed. Soon you'll be too old to see us clearly. That's how it usually works. I don't want to stop seeing you, Kenji said. You won't stop completely, Yuki assured him. You'll just see us differently, less directly, more like sensing we're there rather than seeing us. That's okay. The important thing is that you'll remember, and you'll keep paying attention. To bridges? To everything, Yuki said. To what's visible and what's invisible. To what needs to change and what needs to be preserved. To the space where both things can be true at once. Kenji thought about his father's bridge. Steel and concrete carrying cars and people, but also carrying something invisible. Something that only mattered to those who knew to look for it. He thought about Kenta's journal, about the old stonemasons who had built with their hands, but also with their hearts, who had created passages for all travelers, seen and unseen, I think, Kenji said slowly. That's what bridges are really for, not just crossing water, crossing the distance between different kinds of understanding. Yuki's eyes gleamed with approval. Now you're learning. Bridge builder's son. Above them, a crow called out. Or maybe it was a spirit in crow form. Kenji could never quite tell anymore. The morning mist was lifting, revealing the island in its new configuration. Old paths and new roads, ancient stones and modern steel, tradition and progress existing side by side, because someone had been willing to design a bridge that honored both. Kenji ran his hand over the old bridge's stone, feeling the carved symbol beneath the moss, then looked toward the horizon where his father's bridge stood proud against the sky. 2 bridges, 2 kinds of connection, both necessary, both beautiful in their own way. Will you teach me more? He asked Yuki. About the island? About how to see. Every morning you come, Yuki said. I'm teaching you. That's what bridges do. They connect, and in connecting, they teach. You just have to keep paying attention. Kenji smiled. The sun was rising higher now, burning off the last of the mist, and somewhere in the distance, he could hear both the old covered bridge creaking in the morning breeze and the new steel bridge humming with traffic. 2 songs, different but harmonious. He was 10 years old now, standing between worlds, and he understood something his father was only beginning to learn, that the best bridges don't make you choose between where you've been and where you're going. They carry you across, holding both shores at once, connecting what was with what will be. And in that connection, if you built carefully and listened well, everyone could cross, even those you couldn't see. The end.